Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories scrolling across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Prey Animals, written by The Cursor Hasn't Moved. Mixandi was displeased. Indeed, he had much to be displeased over. For in addition to being outside an empire among barbarians, who for the most part had an improper number of limbs, he found himself unemployed and marooned far from true civilization. Worse, his plea to the elders to begin courtship had been rejected. True, while amongst the uncrested barbarians, there was little he could do to attract the attention of a strong female, but the terse one-word rejection of unworthy stung all the same. Was he not youthful? Was he not virile? Was he not strong? Was he not fine mate? The elders did not give their reasons in the reply, but Mixandi knew them anyway. They'd been laid out to him bluntly and without passion the last time he was on his homeworld of Redridge Secundus, and they still itched beneath his scales. The first reason, he was in every way unbloodied. Not a hunter, not warrior, nor guardian, nor pioneer was he, for never once had he had the lifeblood of another creature spilled by his claws, nor had he ever fired a weapon in anger. More, he had naught to his name, no den of his own, no ship, not even a store of credit which a female might be enticed to claim from him, which become blooded or gain great spoils by minor effort amongst the barbarians. However, the worst that the elders had said about his flaws was a flaw of his mind. They had declared him a great fool. Worse, they were the fools for calling him such, for their reason was that he did not respect the newest barbarians amongst the stars, these Terrans. Mixandi knew that great fools the elders were, not to see the small, soft humans and what they blithely insisted were not servant races for what they were, prey animals. Why else would the doggos and big kitties accompany the humans in their ships, on their stations, and on their planets? To defend them from predators, of course, and only prey needs such defense. Mixandi had seen the official history of these races, and he could see what others could not, that they were lies crafted to cover the weakness of humans and the true purpose of the companion races. This was the reason that they had called him a great fool, for knowing and speaking the truth. All of this stormed in Mixandi's mind as he spent his last 6 credits to his name on renting a heat rock so that he could warm his blood and watch the barbarians bustle about in the station. The disgusting amount of them were warm bloods. It was always unnerving to watch the warm bloods just moving around carelessly, expending heat no matter how many of them he'd seen. At least the rare hardshells and Jakku carried heat sources with them, even if they had too many and too few limbs respectively. They were almost civilized compared to the warm bloods. Fur-clad with the lumbering cow call, scampering arboreal arborix, cloth-swathed plodding terror quills, the properly limbed staggerlets, and of course the star satyrs, not to mention the avian dropping feathers everywhere, and other cold-blooded near-civilized people. It made for an untidy sight. Even still, humans were easy to spot in the press, despite how tiny they were. This is because the warm bloods found these tiny things cute, whatever cute was. Therefore, all one had to do was look to see where grazers dropped down and the crowd parts ever so slightly. Foolishness. If a being was not strong or nimble enough to make its own way, it should not be made easy for them. It was as he watched the signs of a human wind its way through the station's atrium that Mixandi conceived of an idea. He could prove his understanding of humans correct and become bloodied as a hunter in one fell swoop. His tail twitched and his 4 powerful legs tensed over the heat rock while he took the glass of complimentary water in hand. All he had to do was kill one, and that's what prey were for. Visions of glorious conquest and vulnerable human worlds, scores of strong females, and the acknowledgement of the elders washed over him as he considered this idea. At the very least, he'd gain a mate when he succeeded. The fact that his own empire and both major factions of humans were allied in an ongoing war in which humans made up the bulk of combat effective forces, both naval and on the ground, never entered his mind. Before he could do that, he found prey of a different sort. Warm bloods, obviously, since it would be improper to target one of the near-civilized with so many barbarians about, and of them one of the Kaukol. Large they may be, but cowardly was their nature. All Mixandi had to do was stalk one traveling alone for a while, and it ran to the more secluded corridors where Mixandi cornered it and relieved it of its bag. He left the barbarian with a collection of bruises for good measure before making his way to the docks to find a likely ship before station security could be alerted. It was as if the universe strove to meet him his chance to prove himself, for he found passage on a ship of the Star Sailors, and it was well known humans often took up residence aboard their ships. For warm bloods, the Star Sailors were almost not barbaric. Their skin came in many shades of pleasant blue, they had 6 limbs, and they were always very polite. However, they did have hair on their heads, which was not like the crest at all, and they had 4 arms instead of having 4 legs, which was proper. Worse, in Mixcandy's opinion, they allowed humans and their servant races onto their ships as if they themselves were Star Sailors. Irrational. They would no doubt appreciate the truth about humans being revealed by his bold plan if he found prey aboard. If not, well, the ship was destined for a world settled by humans, a place called even better Texas. Mixcandy did not waste time wondering what a Texas was and why this one would be better, but instead considered what kind of human to target. On the one hand, if he took a human female, Mixcandy could count on females and his own kind being impressed and pleased. However, often male warmbloods were a larger and stronger of the race, which was of course unnatural, but the elders would respect the stronger kill. Then again, sometimes the most challenging prey is the young defended by a herd or pack, and this would show his cunning. Mixcandy couldn't come to a decision as he stowed his meager belongings in the passenger cabin, and instead put the problem off for later as he listened to the instructions on how to operate the heated nest. A bit soft for his taste, but comfortable enough. The juvenile Star Sailor female spoke in their own quiet, polite language, and it was translated to Trukai by his implant smoothly. The sleep nest cloth dressing shall be refreshed on the morrow, as reckoned by ever we sail from friend to friend. We have sustenance according to draconid requirements, but if you have preferences, please tell our cook. The decks above and below are off limits to passengers, as they are private and hazardous, respectively. Understood? Of course, the translation wasn't perfect, as such things always are. Likely, the juvenile had added many unnecessary sounds signifying irrelevant details. However, Mixcandy thought he understood, so he told her, "I have no questions." "Then guest right is yours." Mixcandy did not say anything to that, mainly because the phrase had no good translation, and as such were some familiar sounds that carried little meaning to him. The cabin had a bathing pool chamber included, so he took his unsolved problems and unasked questions with him to soak in hot water, and considered sleeping as the ship translated to hyperspace. It was always good to sleep on that heat source when the opportunity arose. Hunting for humans could wait some hours at least. Then, when he decided to visit the dining hall, it seemed that the universe smiled on his plans once more, while there was a human there. It was probably a male. It was difficult for Mixcandy to tell one barbarian from another, let alone which was male or female. But more importantly, it was with the grouping of Star Sailor juveniles. Clearly, it only felt comfortable amongst the smaller and weaker members of its host race. Pathetic. Then and there, Mixcandy began honing his technique in stalking the human. His goal was to isolate it, as mammals tend to help one another when endangered for some reason. Probably some irrational biological impulse, which impedes the barbarians from allowing the weak to be properly selected out of the population. He had stalked mammals, both sapient and animal, so the outline of the plan was already there. Simply lurk in the background and let it catch glimpses of him until its natural fear drove it to flee. Then, once it was frightened and running, simply choose an isolated spot to spring. Simple. There was no reason to begin immediately, as he could easily observe the human while swallowing pleasantly warmed strips of meat. The thing was pitifully unaware of its surroundings. They didn't even look up from the Star Sailor's young once during the entire meal period, so Mixcandy was reasonably sure that his intent remained undetected. However, he thought he noticed the human shoulders tighten and its center of balance shift slightly. Good. He had discovered its unconscious fear response. Mixcandy began planning to allow the human to see him watching it, as it went to either the above or below deck, when he noticed that the young were calmly filing out of the dining hall, and his line of sight was broken by furniture and his fellow passengers. Then, the human was missing. Mixcandy watched the last of the Star Sailors leave to be sure the human was not hiding among them, and then left to sit in the heated nest to regain some lost heat. In the corridor, he felt a prickling run up his spine beneath his scales. An ancestral fear shot through his bones, and his tail lashed in an involuntary motion, whipping back and forth as he spun in place to scan the space above. Impossible. There was nothing aboard that ship to provoke such a strong response from him, almost as if a hostile female of his own kind was stalking him. He was the only of his race aboard, so that was right out. The barbarians were all too cowed to gaze at him with such hostility, and the near-civilized would have nothing to gain from hunting him. Mixcondi concluded that he must be falling ill and hastened to his cabin and the waiting nest. Sergeant Major retired Enrique Martinez had been having a great day. A quick stop to fill up an empty cabins and a shopping trip at what amounted to an orbital shopping mall had been an excellent chance to dote on the kiddos. Sure, Captain Mondi would tell him that there is no need to overburden the kiddos with material goods. It was just too fun to get them presents at every opportunity. Besides, he'd gotten them clothes this time, and it's always good to have quality clothes aboard. Plus, he got to get the kiddos to interact with passengers' children positively. Even Madrai, who had been shy since the splitting of the fleets. Her older brother, following the call of duty to fight, had been hard on her. However, one of the passengers skeeved him out. He first noticed something was off by that itchy feeling hostile eyes make between a man's shoulders, and a quick glance at one of the convex mirrors revealed the culprit. The centaur-like cross between a crocodile and a monitor lizard the size of a small pony spent the entire dinner hour staring at the kiddos in a decidedly predatory fashion. Sergeant Madge Martinez immediately put himself between the kiddos and the creep, and carefully watched for signs of aggression in reflections. No doubt about it, the creep was stalking one or more of the kids. He could tell by how the eyes lingered on the group instead of taking in the whole room except in glances. This was, of course, completely unacceptable. It wasn't as if Sergeant Madge Martinez had been in any kind of recon role, but any R&I drop trooper could be quiet when they needed, and it wasn't hard to keep out of the line of sight of one being. Sergeant Madge Martinez did just that, and watched the being stare at the kiddos as they followed his instructions to quickly and calmly get back to the crew quarters. Here, burning fury bubbled up in Sergeant Madge Martinez, and only training and experience kept in line as his worst fears were confirmed. That creep was after the kiddos for some unsavory reason. Sergeant Major Martinez followed the big reptile into the corridors of the passenger quarters and kept his distance, and kept out of the being's sight. It wasn't hard to look like he was exactly where he was supposed to be to the other passengers. There was always something to check or inspect on old ships after all. However, once the large predatory reptile was completely alone, the urge to take advantage of his dense bones and muscles was so strong that it was almost a physical force that Sergeant Major Martinez had to resist. The creep must have sensed some hostility because he flailed around in what looked like a wild and violent panic as Sergeant Major Martinez drew back around the corner to watch him. He was sure that his red crest meant that the reptile was a male, went back into his cabin. Then Sergeant Major Martinez went directly to Captain Mundai to inform him that one of the passengers posed a potential threat to the kiddos. Peace, the unreasonably tall and well-endowed four-armed lady said to him with a placating gesture. A look is not a violation of guest right. I'm telling you, he wasn't just looking, he was stalking like a hunter. I believe you, but I'm still host to that creature, and honor demands that I continue to act as such. Sergeant Major Martinez ground his teeth. I know as much, but we can make sure that he doesn't get a shot at the kiddos in some isolated spot to do whatever he wants with one. Maybe he's just a bully, or maybe he's a deranged killer, but either way, there's no reason to let him have a chance. That is a good plan, and it is well with me. Are you certain that you do not wish to hold the office of Master-at-Arms, my friend? Retired means retired, he replied in the tones of an oft-repeated phrase, but home is home. Captain Mondi took up the reply by rote, and if you took up an office, duty would demand you re-enlist in the Republican Naval Infantry, which you already promised your sons you would not do. Thank you, Marn. I keep the light lit so they can find their way home to us, just like you. I will tell Dran to do as you suggest. Mixcondi was getting frustrated. Every time he poked his snout out of his cabin, he was watched by the hard eyes of the Star Sailor crew. Clearly, the cowardly human had run to the Star Sailors for safety. Typical prey behavior. Safety in the herd. It would have made little difference, except the human was so uncooperative as to not panic and flee to an isolated place, no matter how blatantly he stalked it. No, it would boldly lean against the bulkhead, fold its arms, and meet his gaze without even a trace of fear that Mixcondi could detect. Or it would be in the exercise chamber, lifting weights while Mixcondi ran on the treadmill. A more attentive hunter might have noticed just how heavy the weights the small human moved with obvious ease were, but Mixcondi already knew it was weak and cowardly. Or it would appear behind Mixcondi when he was not expecting it, radiating hostility. Atypical prey behavior. Mixcondi found this puzzling but not overly concerning, as every creature responds to threats differently. Perhaps this meant that utter stealth was needed to find a human alone. If their fear response was to show force with numbers, isolating one with fear would be the wrong stalking method. Well, He would see how well the fear response protected humans without stronger barbarians around. This even better Texas was reportedly a frontier human colony, and as such would provide more opportunities to strike. That was no reason to stop trying now, though. Mixcondi was despondent and despaired of ever being allowed to court a female of any standing, for stealth, hostility, and outright provocation had failed to separate his prey from the herd. He was curled in a heated nest, wallowing in failure when there was a pounding at the door. He scrabbled and scrambled over to the hard floor, muscles tensed with a worry that some emergency could be underway. However, after days of frustration, now the universe finally turned towards Mixcondi's fortunes once more. The human was at the door, and even better, he was alone. Your gas right has been fulfilled. We are at Austin Station, in orbit over Even Better, Texas. We ask that you take your leave. Now. Mixcondi seized the opportunity. He reared up on his hind legs to bring his claws on his forelegs and his arms to bear on the pitiful mammal, and felt a sudden, blunt impact right in the center of his fore hips. This was unexpected. What was even more unexpected was that he found himself flung across the room by the blow and scrambling to find his feet and fight through what felt like a broken fore hip. Sergeant Major Martinez didn't expect to be attacked when he told the creep that it was time for him to go, but he had been trained to be ready for the unexpected. He had stepped into the rearing lizard and punched it hard. It was always fun to see Xenos from what they called standard gravity learn that humans were what they called heavy worlders. It was almost common knowledge, but there were still few ignorant fools left, it seemed. Sergeant Major Martinez wasted no time in taking control of the situation. Mixcondi felt a crushing pain near the tip of his tail and knew that he had made several errors in his planning. The human was quite obviously far stronger than it had appeared. It was, despite Mixcondi's best efforts, dragging back across the room by its tail like he was a misbehaving hatchling. Staunch atheist though he was, Mixcondi found himself desperately praying to every deity he ever heard of, and any others that just might happen to be around that nobody was recording but happened next. Sergeant Madge Martinez knew what to do. Maintain momentum. The same concept applied to initiative as to the weakling centaur monitor lizards. Therefore, so long as the beastie couldn't get enough leverage to turn around and bring those big snapping jaws to bear on his tender, unprotected flesh, he would be fine. It helped that the creep seemed to be more interested in panicked scrabbling than actually fighting. Whenever he managed to grasp onto the corner, or doorway, or hatch, or anything else, all Sergeant Major Martinez had to do was squeeze a little harder to make the creep let go, and keep striding towards the airlock. The human was clearly far more formidable than Mixcondi had imagined, and despite his best efforts, he could not escape the iron grip. Worse, it began to snarl and growl in its drawling, harsh language, which was translated just as well by his implants. The second I saw you preying on the young ones, I wished to put you through an airlock. It was only the guest right that protected you, and now you violated the very right just as your host fulfilled it. By law and right, I could kill you here and now. These words sent a chill of fear along Mixcondi's spine, and he'd redoubled his efforts to escape. But the human's monstrous grip only tightened painfully. To his everlasting shame, a submissive keening escaped Mixcondi's throat as he was dragged across the threshold out of the ever we sail from friend to friend. The difference in the artificial gravity was noticeable, mainly because Mixcondi found his own weight to be a crushing burden atop his lungs. He looked on in horror as the human strode past him back into the ship with terrifying ease. Even Better, Texas is what you call a heavy world, the tiny monster told him. It's what we call a slightly lower than normal gravity. Enjoy your stay. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.